All right, so we are ready to continue with George Washington Forging of a Nation. He has just had this operation without anesthetic on his upper leg near the hip area to dig out a tumor that was in there, unimaginable pain that he must have been in. And of course, he's still recovering at this point.
I'm going to leave you.
I know. I bet I should
In the shadow, we're here with time to sleep.
In the afternoon, sir.
As your bedtime is 8 o'clock, how many hours will you have to wait between now and the time that your grandpa reads you a story?
Too many.
Or
Too few. Seven. Six.
you sure?
Yes.
George Washington Parker, what am I going to do with you?
I don't know.
Why do you resist so doing your son?
I don't know.
You're driving your schoolmaster to drink.
I know.
Mr. President. Yes. Go see your grandmother. Cake.
Hello, Wash.
So you don't deserve one, Wash.
Sir,
Mr. Hamilton, you're late.
I apologize.
Looks like.
I am furious at the orchestrated attacks on our program. Jefferson, who seems so mild and reasonable in the cabinet meetings, goads Madison to still further attacks in the House. Has he also, behind my back, turned you against me?
No.
Then why else have you delayed so the signing of the bill creating the Bank of the United States?
I'm studying the matter, sir.
Through passionate argument and, I might add, exchange of many favors, I finally get the bill passed by the House 39 to 20, and what happens? You, Mr. President, sit on it for days. I thought you agreed with me that such a bank could stabilize our economy and unite the country as it hasn't been since the Revolution.
I'm disturbed by Mr. Madison's charge of unconstitutionality. And the Congress's doubts trouble me.
We cannot please everyone, sir.
I need to be reminded of that. As there's yet no legal system, I must go slowly.
That, of course, is your prerogative, Mr. President, and I will eagerly await your decision. Good day, sir.
Alex? Be patient.
Mr. Hamilton,
Sir,
the President is expecting.
why should I be denounced by your friend and protege Madison as the great corrupter of my country, when the truth is I've saved the United States by restoring its credit and breathing new life into its floundering economy, by urging the President to leave from the bank? You, sir, risked the nation's financial life.
The Bank of the United States, which you so eloquently promote, could become not so much the engine of the state as the engine of its corruption.
That is ridiculous.
By granting Congress more power to do whatever it deems good for the United States, you also grant them the power to do whatever evil they please.
Have you ever read my bill, or is your judgment another hand-me-down from Madison?
My God, Mr. Hamilton. Gentlemen, please.
Sir, help me convince Mr. Jefferson. He and Madison, by their strict interpretation of the Constitution, would put shackles on us forever so that we cannot change with the times. A strong government must have the right to intervene in all matters touching the general welfare.
But what are the consequences of such power? Our freedom is threatened. Already the veterans and the poor have been betrayed.
Oh, Mr. Jefferson, that.
Can you deny, sir, that speculators descended on the backcountry purchased stock at depressed prices and sold it at greatly increased value to become rich? Your funding, sir, proved to be a flagrant injustice and corrupt at the heart. And so made this damnable bank and the rest of your plans.
The last thing I wished to do in all the world was hurt those who fought and bled by my side in the war. Even out of injustice can come a greater good, a nation of new strength.
Mr. Jefferson,
With your help, we could create an economic structure that'll last for centuries.
you, sir, you promised to make us self-sufficient. Yes, I would have us export food, natural resources, and import manufactures forevermore. Let the workhouses and the factories remain in the foul cities of Europe.
You would deny destiny then and turn away from what could be our greatness.
You may keep your greatness and your destiny and your fetid dreams of wealth through manufacture. Sir, the people who rule the land are the chosen people of God, if ever indeed he had chosen people.
Excuse me, Grandpa. Forgive me, Mr. Jefferson, Mr. Hamilton, for interrupting you.
Yes.
Please convey apologies to your grandmother. Whatever else need be said, why, obviously, we have no common ground. Good day, Mr. Hamilton? Mr. President, no. I don't need to hear any more. I'm unminded my own time. Good day, sir.
Billy told me about Mr. Hamilton and Mr. Jefferson. I'm sorry.
Doesn't Jefferson remember the war? Printing that worthless paper money to keep the army in the field, and then they went hungry. What am I to do? I'm glad you're here, gentlemen. Mr. Jeff.
Well, we'll see a solution here, but before we go on to that, let me ask you a question. Why would Washington have such differing opinions in his cabinet? Why would he have men of such different opinions about things serving in his cabinet? Why would he do that? Isn't he inviting disagreement, rancor? What do you think, Steph?
Maybe see different sides of conflicts and not just have one side agree on something.
It'd be easier to surround yourself with people who all agree with you, right? Or all agree together.
And it's always good to see the pros and cons in situations. So when you have someone showing you the cons or someone showing you the pros, then it helps you make the decision.
Right. So what does this show us about Washington? Does this give us some insight into the man? Mm-hmm. Sarah?
He's looking to find the best solution rather than just
Right. So he wants to know what the different opinions are. Now, when we look at Hamilton and Jefferson, these are two men that are diametrically opposed to one another in a lot of ways. So let's consider what those opinions are. Well, let me ask you this before we go on to that. How have things changed since then in the choosing of a cabinet? Michaela?
The cabinet is only your party, and there's no opposite party or anything to differentiate.
Yeah, usually there have been some exceptions, even within the last 50 years of people of the opposite party being on the cabinet, but usually it's people that agree with you. In fact, what we've seen recently in President Trump's cabinet is one person after another resigning because they had a disagreement with the president, or being fired because they had a disagreement, rather than trying to get a number of different voices heard. So things have definitely changed. I want us to consider the differences between Hamilton and Jefferson. There we go. As we think about Hamilton, first of all, what's your impression about his major emphasis, or what is his perspective, generally speaking? What would you say his major goal is? Devin?
To form a strong economy.
Yeah, to have a strong economy. And he has what position? Secretary of Treasury, right? So you need to remember that. And what position does Jefferson have? What is Jefferson's main focus? Hamilton wants to make sure we have a strong government for a strong economy. What's Jefferson's main idea here? What's he thinking? What does he want to protect?
Like agriculture, importing and exporting.
Yeah, he wants to emphasize agriculture. What's he most concerned with? That he's afraid of with Hamilton's perspective. Joey?
Are the states being corrupted?
Yeah, of government being corrupt, which would affect individuals. Let's take a look at the differences here. In Hamilton, this has not been addressed yet, but he believed in a potent standing army. What's potent mean? Yeah. So he believed we needed to have a full-time army. Why? To be prepared at any moment for, in case we were attacked by a foreign country, or even to put down any kind of insurrections. Jefferson was not in favor of that. Jefferson wanted to rely upon the local militias, just like they had during the War of Independence. Hamilton wanted to extend the judiciary. What does that mean? What do you think that means? Hayden, do you have an idea?
Nope.
Sally? Lana? In a way, give more power to the court. How would he accomplish that? Okay, and by having a better court system means having more courts. You know, he wanted to have, because remember the Constitution only specifically directed there to be what? Supreme Court. Didn't address any other courts. Said the Congress would have to do that, and Hamilton was in favor of continuing that. He's also in favor of building a system of roads and canals, that the federal government should be involved in building roads and canals. What would be his purpose there? Alex?
Military transport.
Not so much about military transport within the country, because you're not really concerned about moving troops around within the country primarily. I mean, you hope you don't have to do that. What's his other focus here that he would want to have roads? Lahana?
Could be for communication.
For communication, and especially transportation of goods. So that would help the economy also, right? It would bring states together. If you're depending on states to build the roads, then a state might build a road to their border, and then there might not be a road on the other side. And so this would improve relationships between states, trade, improve the economy. And that's the one area that I will depart from the statement that I've made that you may have heard me say, and that is the primary role of government is protection. The primary role of government is protection. Protection within, keeping law and order, and protection without, defense against foreign nations. And anything that falls outside of that is not the business of government. Except, I'll make this one exception. I think there is a place for building roads, canals, ways of transportation that go across states so that transportation can be improved. That seems like that falls under the, definitely falls under the rubric of for the welfare of the people. Another thing he believed in was increasing taxes. Because what? You got to pay for this and this and this. So you've got to increase taxes in order to do that. He believed that there needed to be an amendment to the Constitution in order to subdivide the larger states. Like what? What states would that be?
Virginia.
Virginia and New York. Now, he's from New York, not originally, but that's where he lived. But Jefferson is from where? Virginia. Would Jefferson be in favor of subdividing Virginia into smaller states? No. And not much anybody else was either, even his own people in New York. Here's his financial program. He put out what are called government bonds. Does anybody know what a bond is? What's a bond? You've heard of a U.S. savings bond, maybe? Anybody know what a bond is? Do you know, Michaela?
It's sort of a bond, so it's like a paper that says that in this many years that this will be worth this much money because it went to the bank to pay it.
Right, and what is it worth when you first purchase it? Well, you purchase, but you do have to put out money for it, right? They don't give them out free. So if it's a, let's say, for example, a $25 bond, that in 10 years it's worth $25, but it's not worth that when you buy it. You buy it for less than that. So it's really a loan to the government. You're loaning them money, and then in a certain number of years you get back what you paid plus interest, which will end up being $25 if that's what the bond is. Does that make sense? So a bond is really a loan. So he felt this was a good way of getting money for the government instead of borrowing it from banks or borrowing it from other countries, to borrow it from your own people, the people of the country. What would be the advantage of that? Why would it be better to borrow from your own people instead of from like a foreign country? Do you think why that'd be better, Brady? That's hard to say, better, Brady. Had to think about it. No? Sophia, can you think of a way why, the reason why that would be better, preferable to borrow from your own people? Joey, what do you think?
Probably because other countries don't have the same currency.
That wouldn't be a huge obstacle. It's a good thought, but that's easily overcome. Sarah, do you have an idea?
You wouldn't be in debt to foreign nations, you'd be in debt to young people, so maybe only really benefiting the country.
Okay, good. So you really don't want to be in debt to other countries because they could use that against you. It's better to be in debt to your own people because then they have a vested interest in the success of the country. Because would they want the country to fail if they have bonds? They're out there waiting to be redeemed? No. They want the country to do well so that in however many years they turn in that bond, they actually get the full value of it. So Hamilton would put forth this program in order to raise money. He also, as you heard them talk about, promoted the idea of the Bank of the United States. And for several reasons, I think your book talked about this, and we'll talk more about it in a few minutes, I think. All right, here's a breakdown between the two. Differences. So Hamilton was perceived as favoring the wealthy. Jefferson favored the common man. What's ironic about that? Where's the irony? Megan, can you think why that's ironic? Steph, can you?
Well, Hamilton wasn't, like, he grew up poor, and Jefferson liked that.
Yeah, Jefferson grew up wealthy, right? He was a wealthy man. Hamilton grew up a poor man. In fact, he was an illegitimate son, born in the West Indies. Came to America, had to have somebody sponsor him in order to go to school, and he worked his way up. So you would expect maybe to be the opposite. All right, Hamilton favored a strong central government and a loose interpretation of the Constitution. What does that mean, a loose interpretation? What's a loose interpretation? Caleb, do you know what that is?
Where you can like not interpret it exactly what it says with some leeway.
Yeah, a loose interpretation, you interpret it not exactly word for word. You interpret it as to general meaning and things like that. And he had to do that in order to have the strong central government, because the Constitution itself doesn't have in there you can have a Bank of the United States. It doesn't have in there you can have government bonds. So in order to do the things he wanted to do, he had to interpret the Constitution rather loosely. That you can do those things if the Constitution doesn't say you can't. Whereas Jefferson favored states' rights, that is, less central government, more state government, and a strict interpretation of the Constitution. A strict interpretation means just what it says. That's all you can do. Now, it's interesting that as these interpretations of the Constitution were this way, that's also historically what's happened in understanding the Bible. Back during the Reformation, a major event in church history, there were those that believed, like Martin Luther, in a rather loose interpretation as it refers to the conduct of the church. He said if the Bible doesn't prohibit it, then you can do it. And so he brought musical instruments in, things like that, had that. But there were those who felt the opposite, that if the Bible doesn't say that it's there, then you shouldn't have it. And so the Bible doesn't mention pianos, so you can't have pianos, things like that. And some of those wars that have taken place over those issues come down to just how strict is your understanding of what's being said. All right, but remember that, the loose interpretation and the strict interpretation of the Constitution. Hamilton favored manufacturers and shipping merchants. So he wanted to encourage trade and manufacturing. Well, we just saw Jefferson, he's favoring farmers and planters. What did he think about manufacturing? What was his opinion about manufacturing? Nate?
Manufacturing in the country.
Yeah. What was his opinion about that?
Keep it in the country.
No, Brady? Steven?
He liked having American supplies being manufactured in different countries.
Why?
Because it wouldn't cost America as much as to make it in their own country.
No, he's not looking at cost. You're right. Jefferson believed we ought to keep the factories in other countries. Let Great Britain and those other countries manufacture stuff, and we'll import it. Not because it would cost us less, but why? Lahana, did you have your hand up? Anybody else have an idea? Why was he? Why did he think it'd be better to have factories in other countries and not in the United States? Devin?
Maybe because it would improve relationships with other countries.
No, he's not concerned about that. Nate?
So you could use most of the land for farming.
Well, he thinks that's a better use of the land is by farming, but why does he want to keep factories out? He mentions it in that little conversation he had with Hamilton. Let's see. Did you pick up on it, Michaela?
He says let the manufacturing stay in the dirty cities.
Yeah, because factories tend to be, remember back in this time especially, factories tend to be very dirty. They're using coal for steam power. Have you ever seen coal burn? It puts out a lot of smoke. People that work in those places are very dirty. Oftentimes there is associated with cities that grow up around factories, disease and things like that. And he sees all that happening remember the Industrial Revolution is not very old. So factories are a relatively new thing from that standpoint. And so as factories first got started, the factories and the cities around those factories were not ideal places to live. And so Jefferson basically wants to say he wants to keep all that dirt and filth and disease and everything. Let that stay in Europe. Let them do all that, and we'll manufacture food. We'll grow food and we'll supply Europe with food, and we'll buy the manufacturers from them. You follow his idea? So that's his perspective. All right. So Hamilton favors a protective tariff and excise tax. All right. What is a tariff, first of all? What's a tariff, Megan? It's a tax. A tax on what? Can you be more specific? What kind of tax, Joey?
The trade tax,
On what kind of trade?
like item, I don't know.
Items. That what? Hayden?
Imports and exports.
Narrow that down. Which one is it? Yeah, imports. So you're taxing imports into your country. That's a tariff. Now, what's a protective tariff? Does anybody know what that is? Have you ever talked about that before? How many have ever heard of a protective tariff? Okay, a few of you. Do you remember what it is? Sophie, do you remember what it is? It's protecting something, right? It's a protective tariff. What is a protective tariff protecting? Michaela?
Is it protecting the market, so like certain goods have higher tariffs than other goods?
Yeah, so you're protecting the goods that are made in your country. So let's say there's a shoe factory in Boston, and shoes are being imported from England. And so people are looking at shoes and say, well, the English shoes, I hear they're a little bit better, but they're the same price, so I might as well buy the English shoes. What a protective tariff does is it adds a tax onto those shoes coming in from England. So now they're more expensive than American shoes. So if people are going to buy what is the least expensive, they'll buy the American shoes. And that'll help promote American industry. Does that make sense? Does everybody follow that? That's a protective tariff. It's meant to protect our own industries rather than having people buy them from other countries. So he favored that. Excise tax would be an internal tax. And Jefferson opposed those. Generally, Hamilton's in favor of taxes and Jefferson's against them. Jefferson, of course, doesn't believe that we ought to have industry, so he's not going to protect them. Right? Hamilton supported the national bank. Jefferson thought that's something that should be at the state level, state banks, not a national bank. Too much power in a national bank. Hamilton wanted more government employees, and of course Jefferson wanted fewer. Hamilton supported assumption of state debts, which we've already talked about, and Jefferson opposed assumption. Hamilton, when we look at the two major nations with whom the United States has to deal, Great Britain and France, Hamilton generally favored the British, and Jefferson favored the French. Hamilton favored limited freedom of speech and press. So he felt that you should be able to say whatever you want. You should be able to print whatever you want. There needs to be limitations on what is put out there. Whereas Jefferson upheld the Bill of Rights as sacred, which means total freedom of the press and speech. Hamilton favored the seaboard cities along the coast, and Jefferson the south and the west, which is more rural, more agricultural. All right, so does that give you a good picture of the differences between these two men? Try to keep that straight. And not only watching the movie, but also for future quizzing and testing purposes as well. All right, is there anything that we've gone over here that as you're looking back on it, you say, I'm not sure I got that quite? Anything you need re-told, re-explained? Okay, let's see. Let's take a little quiz. I want want you to, just on a piece of scrap paper, this won't count for a grade. I want you to write down who you think said this. Hamilton or Jefferson? You put an H or a J. Okay, who do you think said this? And this will give you an idea whether you understand the differences between these two men. Everybody see it all right? You can't move. All right, everybody have an answer? Either an H or a J? How many say H? How many say J? Now, don't be afraid if you disagree. Put your hand up. Sometimes the one person is right. In this case, you're all right if you put H. Hamilton would have said that because he didn't believe in the people as being able to govern themselves. All right, let's try this one. There are words you don't know. Ask. Don't be afraid to ask. Okay, everybody finished? All right, how many put H? How many put J? You are right. That would be Jefferson. He did not like government. Always oppressive. Okay, we ready? How many said H? How many said J? All right, you guys are sharp. Jefferson. This one's a little more complicated. You figure it out. All right, how many said H? How many said J? And the answer is Hamilton. Why? He wants to have one source of credit of borrowing. That'd be the federal government, so that all is all the same, and to be in support of the arrangements of the government. So that would be Hamilton. All right, how many said H? J? You are correct. That would be Jefferson. Believes in the common sense of mankind in general. All right, how many say H? How many say J? Oh, we have a division. We have some people didn't say anything, I think. All right, somebody want to make their case? Michaela?
It says that constitutions should only consist of general provisions, and it says that they must be permanent and they cannot calculate the passage. So, like, Jefferson believed that, like, you have to be permanent in the future.
Okay, so you're saying Jefferson. Okay, who says Hamilton? I'd like to argue your side. Well, who said Hamilton? You're backing off?
I had originally said Hamilton, but that was because I just like cannot just wanted the can in my head when I read it, and so
Are you changing your mind then?
well, yeah, now that I actually like, see the other
Nate, did you say Hamilton?
Yeah, I think so. Because he says a constitution should consist of general stuff, not super strict things.
Which interpretation of the Constitution would this fit into, that it's only of general provisions? Loose or strict? Loose. Because, and because a constitution is permanent and not easily changed, it needs to be loose so that we can use it when in different circumstances. That would be Hamilton. In fact, Michaela's point was that because of the permanence and possible change that would fit Jefferson, in reality, Jefferson felt that we needed to have a new revolution every once in a while and just totally scrap it and start over again. So he did not believe in a permanent constitution. So you're looking at it from that standpoint. Okay, that was a little tricky maybe for you, but the key here is general provisions. All right, let's see. Got another one here. Whoops. All right, quickly on this one. How many say H? How many say J? Yeah, that is Jefferson. He didn't believe that they had a right to form a bank. Construed liberally in advancement of the public good. How many would say H? How many say J? No. Hamilton is the one that construes it liberally. This is a loose interpretation. This is Hamilton. All right, we'll come back tomorrow and continue to see this conflict between Hamilton and Jefferson and George Washington. I don't know.